actually been formalized again. And India-Pakistan relations are also not formalized by any security treaty. What you have in place of a formal security treaty is these very loose kind of bilateral, vaguely worded bilateral treaties, and you have CBMs, confidence building measures, which is not really a full-fledged security arrangement, but it is just sort of conflict management measure to prevent the outbreak of war between India and Pakistan. So the period since the end of the Cold War, around the 1989 to 91 period, has also seen the growth of some important CBMs, confidence building measures, to prevent the outbreak of war. And that is the best you have, closest you have to a security arrangement. And that includes there are two key agreements in that. One is the agreement which was inked between Benazir Bhutto and Rajiv Gandhi in December of 1988, ratified in 91 and implemented from January 1st, 1992. That is the agreement not to attack each other's nuclear facilities. Each country will, on January 1st each year, declare its list of nuclear facilities, and the agreement is that even in the event of a war, the nuclear facilities will not be attacked by either side. So that's an important CBM in a de facto nuclear, first de facto and then officially declared since 1998 nuclear capability on both sides. Okay, nuclear weapons capability on formal weaponization after the 1998 tests. So this is an important CBM. The other important CBM is in February 1999, about 8 months after the May 1998 nuclear tests by both India and Pakistan, when the then Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee went to Lahore, the famous bus ride, as a part of the Lahore Declaration, which was vaguely worded, I mean it was general, there was a memorandum which spelt out that missile tests will also be pre-notified. Military exercises and missile tests will be, military exercises is a separate thing, that was along with other CBMs, like a hotline between the DGMOs, Director Generals of Military Operations, and later between foreign secretaries. There was also another CBM on pre-notification of major military exercises. This was a kind of a fallout of the Operation Brass Tacks military exercise of the winter of 86-87, which appeared to come to almost to a conventional war at one stage. So these were some of the other CBMs. But the CBM on the notification of prior notification of missile tests was in February of 1999. So essentially you have a bunch of CBMs and not a formal security treaty between India and Pakistan, and similarly there is no region-wide security treaty either. So there is a kind of a vacuum in a formalization of a security arrangement for the region, unlike in most other major regions of the world. Okay. This last 2 decades of the post-Cold War period has seen heightened India-Pakistan relations on the issue of Kashmir and heightened tension between India and Pakistan over the still ongoing and sputtering separatist movement in Kashmir. And the nuclear tests of 1998 marked a high point in the tension, which led to the Kargil war, the Kargil sort of border war of the summer of 1999, which was in a sense what in international relations theory is called the stability-instability paradox, the classic case of the stability-instability paradox of international relations theory. That is originally put forward by Glenn Snyder, in which he said that if there is stability at the nuclear level, if a nuclear power achieves a deterrent against another nuclear power, he was talking about the Soviet Union and the US, so mutual deterrence by mutual second strike capability is achieved, then there is stability at the nuclear level. Neither side has an incentive to attempt a first strike because they will be hit by an assured second strike. So there is stability at the nuclear level. But the catching up power which achieves stability at the nuclear level by achieving a deterrent capability then can be adventurous at the sub-nuclear level in terms of conventional thrusts or in terms of sub-conventional supporting militancy, guerrilla warfare and so forth, because it knows it has a nuclear deterrent. So it can indulge in aggression below the nuclear threshold because it knows it has a nuclear deterrent. This is exactly what Pakistan tried in the case of Kargil. And because having achieved a demonstrated nuclear deterrent, it knew that India cannot launch an all-out war against it in response to its sort of cross-border thrust in the Kargil region. And India cannot do what it tried to do in 1965 when in response to Operation Gibraltar in Kashmir, India launched a war across the Punjab border. So this was a case of the stability-instability paradox, in the sense that, and this has been continuing. The Mumbai attacks of November 2008 were also a case where major terrorist attack could be attempted, which would, in the absence of nuclear weapons and Indian conventional preponderance, India could have launched a conventional retaliation, which is not possible because Pakistan has a nuclear deterrent. So you are seeing the sort of playing out of the stability-instability paradox of Glenn Snyder in the subcontinent. After nuclear deterrence, de facto nuclear deterrence, howsoever unstable, has been achieved. Okay. Now, Pakistani policy on all since 1994 till 2004, for about a decade, was that there can be no improvement in relations unless Kashmir is resolved as a precondition. Now that changed after on the sidelines of the SAARC summit of January 2004 in Islamabad, when Pakistan, having tried Kargil in 99 and after tried the parliament attack, terrorist attack in December 2001, to which India responded with Operation Parakram, a full-scale mobilization on the border, like brass tacks, on a bigger scale for 10 months from December 2001 to October 2002, but without effect. I mean, that did not scare Pakistan. Pakistan did not back down because they had a nuclear capability, nuclear deterrent. So then both sides came around in January 2004 on the sidelines of the SAARC summit when Vajpayee met Musharraf, that they will resume the composite dialogue of a basket of 8 issues, of which Kashmir is only one, and that the progress of the composite dialogue will not be preconditioned on resolving Kashmir. So in a sense, Pakistan, Musharraf that time, backed down and said, okay, we are not preconditioning the entire relationship on Kashmir. We will proceed on attempting to resolve a range of issues, which include Siachen, which includes the Tulbul navigation, the Vular barrage in Kashmir, which involves economic relations, which involves control of drug trafficking. It involves terrorism also. They agreed that they will not allow their soil to be used for terrorist attacks against India, although that has been violated since 26/11. So, and there was a ceasefire along the line of control. So there was a fresh attempt to proceed on a multi-front basis, multi-issue basis, not making everything hinge on Kashmir. And that seems to have taken a hard knock. I mean, somewhere along the line, General Kayani seems to have made the decision that there was not, from his point of view, enough progress, so he attempted 26/11. And after that, there was another freeze, and now India seems to have, after that, softened and is going for the revival of the composite dialogue on a basket of multiple issues, despite no serious action being taken on the terrorist attack of 26/11. So India seems to have softened its stand in the last 2 years. This is a very capsule kind of survey of what's happened. I'm just giving you a broad. In terms of the other countries, one is that trade is extremely small. The percentage of intra-regional trade as a share of the total trade of the region is less than 5%, despite its significant increase in the years since 2003-04, along with the boom of the Indian economy from 2003-04 to even now. Even now, it was despite the slowdown to a growth rate of maybe even less than 6% in the current financial year. Still, by global standards, Indian economy is still growing faster. And so there's been a growth of intra-SAARC trade since 2003-04, significantly, even with India and Pakistan. But that's still less than 5% of the region's trade. And of course, this masks differences in the sense that the smaller countries, for them, the trade with India, with SAARC effectively, which for them it means with India, is a much bigger share of their total trade than it is for India. For India, the share of the other countries in India's total trade is very tiny. It is about 2 point something percent. So it's still very limited. So this is, I've given you, with the other smaller countries also, India has had not very fruitful relationships, in the sense that it's not as if it's only Pakistan which is the problem. Our relationships with other countries are hunky-dory. They are not with Bangladesh, with Nepal, except Bhutan, which is one of the, Bhutan, Maldives are the smallest countries in the region. Even with, there are sensitivities and differences which have to be managed in relationships with Nepal, Bangladesh and with Sri Lanka too. So you're not seeing a situation of what in the international relations theory literature is called bandwagoning. I mean, bandwagoning is when smaller or lesser powers don't try to balance in the sense of counterbalance the leading power, but they try to bandwagon towards it. They orient themselves towards it, want to integrate with it, as a growth pole or as a security pole, security umbrella. You're not seeing that. You're not seeing bandwagoning happening in South Asia. So the, conceptual question that I want to put forward in this brief point in time is that why is this region not seeing integration, not seeing cooperation, not seeing bandwagoning towards the leading power? India is about something like 75 to 80% of the region's population, GDP, and the bulk of its area, and it is geographically central. It is economically the hub. It is geographically central. Everybody has a border with India. Nobody else has a border with anybody else except now Pakistan and Afghanistan, after Afghanistan joining SAARC. So why do you see balancing or soft balancing behavior? Hard balancing in the case of Pakistan, where it tries to match India militarily, has achieved a nuclear deterrent, wants to also achieve a conventional balance. And the others, you find soft balancing. You find diplomatic maneuvering to try to balance India, ward off India, rather than integrate with India or orient them. You don't see bandwagoning behavior. So now, in the international relations theory literature, there's a huge debate on bandwagoning versus balancing. That is, why do states try to join or bandwagon with an emerging pole of power? Whenever the global system, in the last 300 years, in the evolution of the global system, when new poles of power have emerged, you find two kinds of behavior. One is balancing. You see that new emerging pole as a threat, you want to counterbalance it, you form coalitions or alliances to try to counterbalance it, keep it in its place. You see it, and the other is you bandwagon with it. You jump on towards bandwagon. You see it as the emerging new power, which, after the end of the Cold War, there was a mad scramble among the former Soviet bloc countries, including former parts of the Soviet Union, to join the European Union, to join NATO. So that's bandwagoning behavior. You join the emerging new winning power, the US. And similarly, around the US, you have NAFTA. Canada and Mexico are part of NAFTA. The Caribbean has all free trade agreements with the US. They're all bandwagoning towards the US because of attraction of the US market. Now, in the South Asian case, you find balancing behavior, not by India's smaller neighbors. You don't find bandwagoning behavior. Why is that? Now, theoretically, you can look at it like this, that the literature says that, a neo-realist or even a classical realist position would argue that a new pole of power, like an emerging India, would be seen as a threat, and therefore countries. Neo-realist theory basically says that countries balance against power when they see power emerging. And so that's one view, that balancing behavior is what is inherent in the world system. The other view is that a variant of neo-realist theory, you can call neoclassical realism, is that, I'm talking about people like Stephen Walt, Randolph Schweller later, that countries balance not against power as such, but against threat, against perceived threat. So perception of threat comes in, perception of aggressive intentions comes into this. So Walt said that if you are perceived as a threat, why are you perceived as a threat? Why may you be perceived as a threat under what? If you have border disputes or territorial disputes, if you have ideological differences, or if you have perceived aggressive intentions. In any of these circumstances, a power is seen as a threat, and then balancing behavior is triggered rather than bandwagoning behavior. And some, Schweller and others like Sweeney and Fritz have argued that bandwagoning behavior can be driven also by shared interests. Now, what are those shared interests? They're primarily, if you got over territorial border issues and things like that, shared interests can be essentially economic interests. Economic integration can lead to shared interests, which lead to bandwagoning behavior, and therefore leads to a reduction in security tensions and formalized security arrangements, treaties, and so forth. And that has not happened in South Asia. So then the next question that arises logically is that with the growth of the Indian economy, if you look at the period when India was a high tariff barrier import substituting industrializing country up to 1989, up to 1991 liberalization, then you had a sharp reduction in tariff barriers, opening of the Indian economy to imports and to foreign investment, rapid growth of over 6% plus in the 90s and about something like more like 8% in the period since 2003. You have a rapid growth of the economy, an increase in its share of world GDP and world trade, and an openness to imports and so forth. Then why did the smaller countries not want to bandwagon with India, take advantage of India as the central hub and as a growing regional economy, and also source of supply for many inputs which they can buy cheaper from India than they can buy from other countries? So why did this growth of the Indian economy and opening of the Indian economy simultaneously over 2 decades not lead to much greater intra-regional trade and also change in the foreign policy behavior, security behavior of the smaller neighbors to bandwagon with India, to jump onto India's bandwagon and grow on that basis? Why is there still this sort of soft balancing or hard balancing behavior? And, theoretically, if you look at the literature on what is called relative gains and absolute gains, there's a difference between neo-realists and neo-liberals. Neo-realists argue that what really motivates states is relative. What states are really sensitive to? What are states sensitive to? They are sensitive to relative gains. That is, if we say, okay, let's make a free trade deal. Okay, I gain, you gain, we both gain. So why not go in that direction? Then, if you're a neo-realist, you will say you gain maybe I gain 10%, but you gain 20%. So you gain more and I gain less, and this is in the economic terms. And if this is convertible into security gains, if the economic gains, relative gains, are convertible into security relative gains, you're going to become more powerful and you'll be a threat to me. So why should I cooperate with you? So that is the sensitivity to relative gains. That's the neo-realist approach. Now, neoliberals argue that sensitivity, the states are sensitive to a function which is their utility function, is something, a combination of relative gains and absolute gains. They are sensitive. They do respond to the prospect of absolute gains, although they are sensitive to relative gains. And this depends on many factors. It depends on whether the state you're dealing with is seen as a threat, a perceived threat, whether economic relative gains are convertible into the security sphere. And there's also the question of cumulation. That is what John Matthews has called cumulative relative gains, where a relative gain in a particular round of interaction, like in 1 year, if you have a trade surplus. Now, does that skew the prospects for the next year and the next year and the next year? If it does skew the prospects that a relative gain in 1 year will lead to additional gains in next year and subsequent, like that, then the whole thing tilts. Then you are talking about cumulative relative gains, in which case cumulative security gains in the end, cumulative weakness, even if you gain absolutely. The other person gains other side gains much more. So in that case, you're not going to enter such a deal, because you're going to be those cumulative relative gains will become cumulative security gains. But suppose it's not such a situation, like in South Asian trade, the bulk of the trade is in standard technology products, it's not in high-tech or weapons and so on, it's in agricultural, mineral and light engineering, low-tech products, where a trade surplus in 1 year does not necessarily mean automatically a bigger trade surplus in the next year for the trade surplus country, which is India. India has a trade surplus with all its neighbors except Bhutan. It's huge trade surplus. India's exports are something like 7-8 times its imports from Pakistan, even from Sri Lanka, Nepal and Bangladesh. So now these relative gains in part of India will not translate into security gains, certainly not in the case of Pakistan. The argument can be made that the achievement of de facto nuclear deterrence means that the relative gains problem is solved, because Pakistan still has a nuclear deterrent, even if India makes even if the initial first 5-10 years of liberalized trade leads to a bigger Indian trade surplus, that does not translate into a greater security threat to Pakistan than what already exists. And what already exists, Pakistan has the capability to deter. So one can make the argument that, in a foreign policy sense, what can India do to induce bandwagoning by the other countries towards itself and create a South Asian community under its leadership voluntarily, without compulsion or coercion? Because only a voluntary, consensual regional cooperation framework will stick. Otherwise, it will unravel. So, what India can do, I would say, is that to use its enormous trade surplus with all its neighbors, except tiny Bhutan. Otherwise, it has a trade surplus of the order of magnitude of something like 7-8 times its exports being 7-8 times more than its imports. It can afford, and that overall trade is still only about less than 5% of its total trade. So it can afford to be much more open, much more non-reciprocally open to imports from its neighbors, and therefore create incentives in those countries, create lobbies or interests in those countries in greater trade and integration with India, while assuring them that India doesn't pose any security threat to them. And in the case of Pakistan, Pakistan has already got a deterrent. In the case of Pakistan, the argument can be made to the Pakistanis, which now the shift in the last 1 year, even after 26/11, towards again the revival of the composite talks approach, including of trade and so forth, and the MFN status given earlier this year, at the end of last year, earlier this year, to India for the first time by Pakistan, and an greater openness to trade with India, seems to be, again, the Pakistanis seems to realize that they have a deterrent, so trade with India is not going to translate into a security threat. And so they have less to fear and much to gain. In which case the incentives are towards integration with India, in which case, 10-15 years down the line, there will be a powerful group within Pakistan which depends on the Indian market.